It was a quiet Saturday morning in the suburban neighborhood of Willow Creek, the kind of peaceful street where neighbors waved from manicured lawns and the scent of fresh baked bread drifted lazily from kitchen windows. And yet, for Emily Thompson, the serenity of a day was only skin deep, a fragile illusion she clung to with every fiber of her being as she wheeled her 12-year-old daughter, Lily, out into the backyard for their usual morning routine of light exercises and sunshine, her heart swelling with pride at the way Lily's eyes sparkled despite the braces that hugged her fragile legs, and the way her hands trembled ever so slightly when she reached for the flowers they had planted together just the week before. Lily had always been the most delicate soul Emily had ever known, a child who had been born with cerebral palsy, but possessed a spirit so resilient that it seemed almost impossible for the world to break her. Yet, in that very moment, Emily felt a subtle tension ripple through the air, an unexplainable heaviness that had nothing to do with the weather and everything to do with the presence that had begun to haunt their neighborhood like a shadow lurking behind the picket fences. Mrs. Karen Whitmore, the HOA president, whose reputation for cruelty and meticulous control was whispered about by neighbors with nervous laughter and cautious glances, and whose eyes now seemed to pierce through the privacy of the Thompsons' backyard, narrowing with judgment. As she scrutinized Lily's wheelchair parked perfectly by the flower bed, her lips twisting into a cold, almost imperceptible smirk, as if she had already decided that something about this family, about this innocent child, was unacceptable, wrong even, as though the mere act of enjoying a sunny morning were a personal affront to her sense of order, and Emily felt a shiver creep down her spine, knowing from years of subtle battles and passive-aggressive notes shoved under the front door that Karen's attention was rarely benevolent. Yet Lily, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing at the edge of their fence, reached out to touch a bright, yellow marigold, her small fingers brushing against the petals with delicate curiosity, and Emily's heart ached with both pride and fear, wishing desperately that the world could see her daughter only as she was beautiful, courageous, and utterly human. But in Willow Creek, appearances mattered more than empathy, and Karen Whitmore was the cruel enforcer of those appearances, a woman who thrived on the discomfort and humiliation of anyone she deemed inferior, and even from across the yard, her gaze was heavy, suffocating, and Emily felt an instinctive urge to shield Lily, to curl her arms around her daughter and pull her into the safety of their home. Though she knew the moment would only make Karen more dangerous, more determined to assert her twisted authority, the tension escalated subtly, almost imperceptibly at first, in the way Karen's shoes scraped deliberately against the gravel as she approached, in the low hum of her voice as she greeted Emily with a false sweetness that did not reach her cold, calculating eyes, in the way her fingers tapped against the handle of the clipboard she carried as though the very air around them were subject to inspection, and Emily's chest tightened with anxiety, recalling the small incidents over the past months, the notes criticizing the height of their garden flowers, the complaints about the noise from Lily's adaptive music lessons, the whispered threats about fines and penalties, and she wondered how it could come to this, how a woman could wield power not through strength but through fear, how a simple morning in the sun could feel like walking into a war zone. And then Karen's voice, smooth but venomous, cut through the calm like a knife, addressing Lily directly with an edge that made Emily's stomach drop. "Isn't it time someone taught you some manners? Young lady, you know this isn't appropriate behavior for someone like you," she said, her words venomous yet laced with a fake charm that made every syllable sting. And Lily's small head lifted, confusion flashing in her wide green eyes, not understanding why a neighbor would single her out for nothing more than living her life, and Emily felt a surge of protective anger rise in her throat, the instinct to confront, to defend, nearly overwhelming her. Yet she hesitated, knowing that Karen thrived on confrontation, on the reaction, the fear, the submission that made her feel powerful, and instead Emily forced herself to smile, to stay calm, to not give Karen the satisfaction of a display, even as her hands trembled, gripping the handles of Lily's wheelchair, the flowers between them trembling in the soft morning breeze, oblivious to the darkness approaching. Karen continued, her words dripping with insidious malice disguised as concern. pointing out every tiny fault she could imagine, from the crooked garden stones to the slightly worn paint on the railing, and every word made Emily's blood boil while Lily's lips quivered, trying to understand, trying to be brave, and for a brief, suspended moment, Emily wished the world could freeze, could pause, so she could figure out how to protect the child she loved more than life itself from the cruelty that lurked just over the fence, knowing deep down that the morning was a mere prelude, that the storm had already begun the moment. Karen had chosen to step into their lives, and that soon, very soon, nothing would remain calm, nothing would remain safe, and the true test of courage, of love, of resilience was about to begin in a neighborhood where appearances were law, where control was power, and where a child's innocence could spark the wrath of a woman willing to destroy anything that dared to shine too brightly. The next afternoon, the air in the Thompson household was thick with unease, a lingering residue of the previous morning's encounter with Karen Whitmore, and as Emily guided Lily into the living room for her music therapy session, she could feel the girl's tiny hands trembling around the straps of her wheelchair, the adaptive keyboard in front of her a fragile sanctuary that seemed to promise comfort in an otherwise hostile world. Yet the moment was shattered by a sharp, insistent knock on the door, a knock that carried the weight of inevitability, the same knock that had signaled the start of countless passive-aggressive battles over garden fences and mailbox heights. And when Emily opened the door, she found Karen standing there, her perfectly tailored outfit and sharp heels a stark contrast to the innocence of the child before her, her clipboard clutched tightly, as if it were a weapon, her eyes glinting with a predatory satisfaction that sent a chill straight to Emily's core. And before Emily could even offer a polite greeting, Karen's voice slithered into the room, smooth yet menacing. "I'm here to address a serious issue," she said, leaning slightly so that Lily could feel the weight of her stare, and Emily's stomach tightened as she realized that this was no casual visit, no minor complaint. It was an ambush, a deliberate strike aimed at unsettling her daughter, and the words that followed made her heart sink. "I've received multiple complaints about the noise coming from this house. That music, that commotion, it's unacceptable. Do you even realize how disruptive it is to the neighborhood?" Karen asked, her tone almost reasonable, like a teacher reprimanding a misbehaving student, but her eyes betrayed the truth. This was not about noise, not about order, not about rules. It was about control, and Emily saw it in every twitch of Karen's mouth, every narrowing of her eyes, every tiny smirk that flickered as she glanced at Lily, who was now staring back, her expression a mix of confusion and fear, her tiny fingers clutching the keyboard as if it could somehow shield her from the hostility radiating from the woman before her. And Emily felt a surge of protective rage, the kind that rises in the chest and refuses to be ignored. Yet she knew better than to confront Karen head-on, having learned painfully over the years that such confrontations only gave her fuel, only escalated the cruelty that seemed to define her very existence. So she forced a calm smile, trying to deflect, trying to reason. Karen, Lily's music lessons are part of her therapy, and we always keep the volume reasonable. I don't think there's any real disturbance, but Karen cut her off with a sharp, almost imperceptible gesture, a tilt of her head that silenced the room like a predator warning its prey, and then, leaning even closer, she whispered in a voice that was deceptively soft yet dripping with malice, "You think rules don't apply to you just because she's different, don't you? That's very dangerous thinking, Emily. Very dangerous indeed." And Emily's pulse quickened, knowing that every word was designed to intimidate, to destabilize, to plant seeds of doubt and fear in both her and her daughter, and Lily, sensing the tension, let out a small whimper, a sound so fragile that it made Emily's chest tighten even more, her mind racing with the endless what-ifs and worst-case scenarios that hovered in the air like storm clouds. And just as Emily opened her mouth to reassure her daughter, Karen's eyes flicked toward the window, narrowing at the sight of Mrs. Jenkins next door peeking through the blinds, a neighbor who often gossiped and whose presence added another layer of pressure to the already suffocating situation, and Karen's lips twisted into a thin, cruel smile, the kind that promised chaos, and she stepped back, lowering her voice but not her menace. "Make sure she behaves. I'll be watching, and with that, she turned and clicked down the porch steps with the precise rhythm of someone confident in their power, leaving Emily and Lily in a suffocating silence that seemed to hum with unspoken threats. And as the door closed behind her, Emily sank to her knees beside her daughter, brushing back Lily's soft brown hair, trying to convey love and reassurance, even as her heart pounded with fear and rage, silently vowing that she would not let Karen's cruelty define her. Child's life, silently promising that if Karen wanted war, the Thompsons would be ready. Yet, even as the mother daughter duo sat in that tense quiet, the air outside seemed charged, as if the neighborhood itself was holding its breath, waiting for the next move. And Emily knew that this confrontation was only the beginning, that Karen's obsession with control and humiliation would escalate, that she would find more ways to terrorize them, and that Lily, despite her bravery, was vulnerable in ways that made Emily's protective instincts flare hotter than ever. And in that moment, the mother realized that the quiet streets of Willow Creek were not peaceful at all, that every smiling neighbor, every manicured lawn, every decorative mailbox could mask the presence of a predator like Karen, and the storm that had begun subtly like the first faint tremor of an earthquake was now rising steadily, threatening to shake the very foundations of their lives. And Emily, gripping Lily's hand, with all her strength, felt the bitter, electric anticipation of what was coming, the knowledge that the real confrontation, the one that would test their courage, their patience, and their very humanity, was still ahead, lurking just over the fence, waiting to strike when they least expected it. And as the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the living room floor, Emily's resolve hardened like steel, for she knew that the battle was not yet lost, that her daughter's spirit was unbreakable, and that no amount of Karen's intimidation could extinguish the light that shone so brightly in the heart of a child who deserved nothing but love, safety, and the right to live freely. Even as the ominous echo of Karen's footsteps faded into the distance, leaving a silence that was heavy, suffocating, and full of promise for the chaos yet to come. The following morning, the air in the Thompson household was heavy with an unspoken tension, a lingering dread that made every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind against the windows, feel like a warning. And as Emily prepared breakfast for Lily, her mind raced with scenarios of what could happen next, a nervous anticipation that had been building since Karen Whitmore's last visit, and Lily, oblivious to the full gravity of the danger, hummed softly to herself while arranging her colored pencils for drawing, her small hands moving carefully over the paper, and Emily smiled faintly, trying to instill a sense of normalcy, a fragile illusion of safety that she knew could shatter at any second, because in Willow Creek, nothing ever stayed peaceful for long, especially when Karen was involved. And then the knock came, sharp, insistent, almost like a hammer striking bone, and Emily's heart leapt into her throat as she realized it wasn't just a visit, it was an attack, deliberate and cruel, the kind that Karen seemed to thrive on. And when she opened the door, Karen was there, standing with that same calculated composure. But now her eyes burned with something darker, something almost feral, a predatory intensity that made Emily's stomach twist. And in that instant, Lily looked up from her drawing, sensing the threat, her eyes wide, shimmering with trust and innocence, and Emily instinctively moved to position herself between her daughter and Karen, her hands. Trembling as she whispered, "Stay calm, Lily, don't let her see you afraid." But Karen's attention was locked entirely on Lily, her gaze cutting through the child like a blade, and Emily realized with a cold, sinking certainty that this wasn't about warnings, wasn't about complaints, wasn't about control, it was about humiliation, about exerting power over someone utterly defenseless. And Karen's voice slithered through the doorway, sweet and poisonous all at once. "You know, young lady there, are consequences for behavior like yours," she said, stepping forward with a deliberate, menacing rhythm, and Emily's pulse hammered in her ears, every instinct screaming that she needed to protect her daughter. But before she could react, Karen's hand shot out, fast and merciless, connecting with Lily's face with a sharp, bone-jarring slap, and the sound of it echoed in the quiet room, startling birds outside and freezing Emily in place, a scream clawing at her throat as she watched her daughter stagger back in shock, a bright rivulet of blood pouring from her nose, her lips trembling, her green eyes wide with disbelief and pain. and Emily felt a wave of horror and rage so powerful it threatened to drown her, every muscle tensing as she lunged forward instinctively, her hands gripping Lily to steady her as Karen smirked, as if she had won some twisted victory. And in that moment, time seemed to stretch, the silence punctuated only by Lily's soft whimpers and the harsh ticking of the clock on the wall, marking the seconds of their nightmare, and Emily's mind raced, trying to comprehend what had just happened, how someone could commit such cruelty in broad daylight, how a neighbor, a grown woman, could target a child so vulnerable with such deliberate malice. And yet, even in her pain, Lily raised a shaky hand, wiping the blood from her nose, her gaze locking onto Karen's with a mix of fear and defiance that made Emily's chest ache with both pride and anguish, and Karen, seeing the flicker of courage in the child's eyes, leaned in closer, her tone dripping with venom. "You'll learn quickly that people like me don't tolerate disobedience," she said, and Emily felt her hands tighten on the wheelchair, knowing that arguing, pleading, reasoning would achieve nothing, because Karen thrived on control and terror, and every attempt to resist only fueled her cruelty. And as Karen turned to leave, her heels clicking with cold finality against the porch, the silence that followed was deafening, the room heavy with the residue of violence, the blood on Lily's face a shocking reminder of just how dangerous their neighbor had become, and Emily, gathering every ounce of courage she had, held her daughter close, whispering reassurances she barely believed herself. "It's okay, baby, it's okay. We'll get through this," even as tears burned her eyes, and she knew that their lives had been irreversibly changed, that Karen's aggression would only escalate, that the streets of Willow Creek were no longer safe, and that protecting Lily would demand every ounce of courage, cunning, and resilience they could summon, because from this moment forward, nothing could shield them from the storm that Karen had unleashed. And as Emily cradled her bleeding daughter, feeling the tremor of fear and anger intertwine in her chest, she silently vowed that this would not be the end of the story, that justice, confrontation, and defiance would follow, and that Karen Whitmore would learn, sooner or later, that cruelty, no matter how precise, could not extinguish the spirit of a child who refused to be broken. The day after the horrific slap, the Thompson household was steeped in a heavy, suffocating silence that seemed to wrap around every corner, every object, every breath. And as Emily helped Lily into the living room, gently brushing a stray strand of blood-stained hair from her face, she could feel the trembling in her daughter's small body, the kind of fear that lodges deep in the bones and refuses to be soothed. In Lily's eyes, usually so bright and filled with curiosity, were now clouded with confusion and apprehension. Glancing toward the window, as if expecting Karen Whitmore to appear again at any moment, her tiny hands gripping the armrests of her wheelchair with a grip so tight that her knuckles turned white, and Emily's heart ached with a pain she had never known before, a mixture of helplessness, rage, and sorrow that made it difficult to breathe, as she realized that the physical pain of the slap was nothing compared to the emotional terror that now clung to her child like a shadow, and she tried to speak softly, to offer comfort, whispering, "It's okay, baby, it's okay. Mom's here." Yet the words sounded hollow even to her own ears, because the truth was that no words could undo what had been done, no amount of reassurance could erase the trauma that now marked Lily's innocence, and the mother knew that every glance, every knock on the door, every rustle of leaves outside would be a trigger from now on, reminder of the cruelty that had entered their lives so violently, and the atmosphere in the house was thick with tension, every sound amplified every shadow suspect, as Emily struggled to mask her own anger and fear while tending to her daughter's needs, checking the small cut on her lip, cleaning the smear of blood from her clothes, and offering water with gentle coaxing, all the while knowing that Karen's presence had seeped into the very walls of their home, leaving them feeling unsafe, exposed, and vulnerable. And as the afternoon stretched on, the neighborhood seemed complicit in their anxiety, each neighbor's glance through the blinds, each whisper on the street a reminder that Willow Creek, once serene, was now a place where cruelty thrived unchecked. And Emily realized that their ordeal was far from over, that Karen's obsession with dominance would not be sated by a single act of violence, and that the emotional scars, the constant fear, the creeping tension would shape every moment to come, And Lily, though brave beyond her years, began to retreat into herself, her playful chatter reduced to hesitant whispers, her laughter muted, replaced by an ever-present vigilance, and Emily felt a crushing weight of responsibility, the kind that leaves one sleepless at night, turning over strategies in the mind, considering every possible avenue to protect a child whose spirit, though resilient, was now under siege, and in that silence, Emily knew she had to act, had to prepare, had to find a way to turn the tables without putting Lily in more danger. But the fear gnawed at her, the uncertainty of when Karen would strike again, the unpredictability of her cruelty, the knowledge that one false move could escalate the situation beyond control, and yet amid the despair there was a flicker of determination, a quiet, simmering resolve that refused to let the darkness win, that whispered to Emily that courage was not the absence of fear, but the willingness to confront it. And she watched as Lily's small hands toyed nervously with a pencil, tracing the lines of her drawing with a precision born of both fear and focus. And Emily saw in that simple act a reminder of why she could not falter, why she had to stay strong, because her daughter's innocence, her courage, her very life depended on it. And as the evening descended, shadows stretching across the living room, Emily made a silent vow that Karen Whitmore's reign of terror would not define them. That every document, every phone call, every neighbor they could ally with would be leveraged to protect Lily, to ensure that justice would eventually prevail. And as she tucked her daughter into bed, smoothing the blankets around her and holding her small, fragile body close, Emily whispered promises of safety, of love, of eventual triumph, even as her own heart trembled with fear for what the next encounter with Karen might bring. Because in Willow Creek, appearances were law, cruelty was unchecked, and a child's vulnerability was a magnet for predators, and Emily knew that the storm was only gathering strength, that the next chapter would demand courage, cunning, and unwavering resolve. And as she left Lily's room, the dim light casting long, trembling shadows down the hallway, she realized that the real battle was just beginning, that Karen's obsession with power would escalate, that every day from now on would be a test of endurance and resilience, and that only by standing firm, by refusing to be intimidated, and by nurturing the unbreakable spirit of her daughter could Emily hope to survive the coming trials. And yet, even as fear threatened to overwhelm her, there was a quiet, stubborn fire in her chest, a determination to rise, to fight, and to ensure that the light within Lily would never be extinguished, no matter how dark the world around them became. In the days following the brutal slap, the Thompson household transformed into a quiet fortress of determination, every creak of the floorboards and flicker of sunlight across the living room a reminder that Karen Whitmore's shadow loomed ever closer, and Emily, her heart still raw with fear and anger, realized that hiding, hoping, or pleading would achieve nothing against a woman who thrived on control and intimidation. And so she began to devise a careful, methodical plan, enlisting every available tool to protect Lily and expose Karen for what she truly was, starting with documenting every interaction, every note, every complaint and confrontation, her hands shaking slightly as she meticulously cataloged evidence in folders and on her phone, knowing that one misstep could either save or endanger her daughter, and Lily, despite the lingering fear from the slap, began to display a quiet bravery that both inspired and terrified Emily, the child taking small but deliberate steps toward recording Karen's abuses herself, pointing out suspicious behaviors, noting down remarks, and sometimes pressing record on her tablet when Karen's voice could be overheard through the windows, her young mind grasping the seriousness of their plight with an uncanny maturity, and Emily marveled at her daughter's courage, pride mixing with a mother's instinctive fear, because every act of bravery could provoke Karen further, and yet it was necessary. It was the only way to reclaim some measure of control in a world where a neighbor's cruelty had shattered their sense of safety, and Emily reached out cautiously to other neighbors, some sympathetic, some wary, presenting her documented evidence, subtly watching their reactions, weighing whom to trust, all while Karen continued her surveillance from across the street, her perfectly manicured nails tapping against her clipboard in a rhythm that made Emily's blood run cold, a reminder that Karen was always watching, always calculating, and that any misstep could escalate the violence once more. And in the evenings, as Lily rested, Emily and her husband, Michael, pored over legal advice online, researched HOA regulations, consulted family lawyers, and planned contingencies for every conceivable scenario, from further harassment to potential physical harm. Their living room table covered in papers, recordings, and notes, a war room for the defense of a child whose innocence had been violated, and the tension in. The household was palpable, every sound a possible signal, every shadow a potential threat. Yet amid the fear, there was an emerging sense of hope, a knowledge that preparation and courage could turn the tide, that documenting every cruel action, every manipulative word, every invasive stare could create an unstoppable force against Karen's tyranny, and Emily watched as Lily, despite the trauma, practiced her own quiet acts of defiance, pressing the record button when Karen's car pulled up to the driveway, whispering into the microphone about what she observed, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands, a tiny beacon of bravery that made Emily's chest ache with love and pride, and slowly, methodically, the family began to piece together a narrative that could not be denied, an irrefutable story of cruelty, harassment, and malice, one that could be presented to neighbors, lawyers, and authorities alike, and Emily felt a fierce resolve building inside her, a fiery determination. That Karen Whitmore would no longer terrorize them with impunity, that her daughter's bravery and their careful preparation would finally meet the predator with a force she could not withstand, and every late-night session of planning and documenting, every whispered conversation about strategy, every careful recording of Karen's movements strengthened their resolve, transforming fear into action, helplessness into purpose, and Emily realized that the Thompsons, despite being ordinary people in a neighborhood that prized appearances over humanity, were now equipped with the tools, the courage, and the strategy to fight back, and the thought of Karen's inevitable reaction, when she discovered that her manipulations and cruelty were being exposed, sent a shiver down Emily's spine, not from fear, but from anticipation, for the balance of power was shifting, and in the quiet, tense evenings when the world seemed to hold its breath, Emily held Lily close and whispered, "We're ready now, we won't let her win," and Lily, her green eyes wide and filled with a newfound determination, nodded ever so slightly, her small fingers gripping her mother's hand with an unspoken promise that they would face whatever came next together, a quiet but powerful alliance against a woman who thought she could break them. And as the night settled over Willow Creek, shadows stretching across the Thompsons' backyard, Emily looked out the window at Karen's darkened house across the street, feeling a mix of dread and exhilaration, knowing that the next confrontation, the real showdown, was approaching, that Karen's next move would either ignite chaos or deliver her reckoning, and that every documented note, every recording, every neighbor briefed, and every legal consultation laid the foundation for the ultimate test of courage, resilience, and justice, a test that would demand the very best of the Thompsons' ingenuity and bravery, because they had decided that fear would no longer control them, and that Karen Whitmore, with all her calculated cruelty, would soon learn that the spirit of a child, when shielded by love, courage, and preparation, could never be crushed. It was a late evening when the Thompsons finally faced the culmination of weeks of fear, planning, and hidden observation, the air in their home electric with tension, every creak of the floorboards and distant car horn a heartbeat echoing in their ears, and Emily felt her pulse race as she wheeled Lily into the living room, where the carefully positioned camera captured the perfect angle of the front porch, their makeshift war room now translated into action, and Michael held his phone in his hand, ready to call authorities at the first sign of escalation, while Lily, her small frame tense but determined, whispered softly, "Mom, I'm ready." Her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands, and Emily's chest swelled with pride and a mother's instinctive fear, knowing that her daughter's courage was about to meet Karen Whitmore's calculated cruelty head-on. And then the sound of Karen's heels clicked sharply against the driveway, each step measured, deliberate, like the ticking of a bomb counting down, and the woman appeared at the door, clipboard in hand, her eyes flicking to the camera, with a flicker of suspicion that betrayed her usual composure. And as she entered, her voice carried that familiar venomous charm. "I told you I'd be watching. You'll learn to behave," but she stopped abruptly, noticing the camera, and Emily felt a spark of hope, knowing that the evidence would now force Karen into a corner, the tables beginning to turn and Karen's smirk faltered, replaced by a glint of rage, a tension that radiated through the room like static electricity. And in that moment, Lily, gathering every ounce of bravery within her, spoke up, her small voice echoing with conviction, "Stop hurting us, Karen." We've recorded everything, and the words, simple yet powerful, seemed to momentarily freeze the room. Karen's eyes narrowing as she scanned the camera, the folders, the documents spread on the table, realizing that her control, her intimidation, her tyranny was being exposed, and Emily, seizing the moment, spoke with quiet authority, "We're done letting you threaten us. It ends now," her hands steady on Lily's wheelchair, her gaze unwavering, and Karen's rage ignited, her voice rising a sharp crescendo of fury. "You think you can humiliate me? You think you can challenge me?" But her words fell on a family united, unshaken by fear, and in that instant, the culmination of weeks of preparation, documentation, and courage collided with Karen's cruelty as Emily calmly dialed the HOA board and law enforcement, presenting the evidence they had painstakingly gathered, recordings of threats, instances of harassment, and proof of the physical assault, and Karen's expression shifted from fury to disbelief, then to desperation as she realized that for the first time, her manipulations could no longer hide behind the mask of authority and community approval, and the room seemed to vibrate with tension, a quiet, charged silence, broken only by Lily's small but steady voice repeating, "We won't let you hurt anyone else." And Emily felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes, not from fear, but from relief and pride as Karen's composure crumbled, the once confident predator now exposed, vulnerable, and impotent in the face of truth, and neighbors who had gathered discreetly outside, alerted by Emily's prior communications, began to witness the confrontation through windows and cameras, murmurs of surprise and outrage spreading as Karen realized that the community's judgment had shifted, and in that crushing cinematic moment, the power dynamic that had long terrified the Thompsons reversed entirely. Karen Whitmore, stripped of her authority and facing the consequences of her cruelty, stormed from a house, her clipboard abandoned, her fury impotent, and Emily, taking a deep, shuddering breath, hugged Lily tightly, feeling the tremor of fear give way to triumph, her daughter's small arms around her neck a reminder of what they had fought to protect. And as the police and HOA officials arrived, guided by the meticulous documentation and the courage of a child who refused to be broken, Emily realized that the nightmare that had begun with a single slap, a single act of cruelty, had finally reached its resolution, a dramatic, suspenseful, emotionally charged payoff in which the darkness of Karen Whitmore's manipulation had collided with the light of love, courage, and justice. And as neighbors whispered about the bravery of the Thompsons, Emily held her daughter close, whispering, "We did it. We stood up. We protected each other." And in that moment, the storm of fear, suspense, and terror gave way to a sense of vindication, relief, and the raw, unshakable truth that courage, preparation, and unity could face even the most relentless of predators, leaving Karen exposed, powerless, and forever marked by the reckoning she had ignored for too long. The days following the climactic confrontation were heavy with relief, introspection, and a profound sense of healing that seeped into every corner of the Thompson household, the air no longer charged with fear, but filled with cautious optimism. And as Emily wheeled Lily into the backyard, sunlight spilling across the garden they had nurtured together, she noticed the small, resilient smile on her daughter's face, a smile that carried the weight of survival, courage, and triumph. And for the first time in weeks, Emily allowed herself to breathe, truly breathe, knowing that the ordeal with Karen Whitmore, a woman who had once loomed over their lives like an unstoppable storm, had finally been confronted, challenged, and brought to account. And while the bruises and trauma lingered both physically and emotionally, there was a tangible sense of victory, a reminder that even in the face of cruelty, love, preparation, and courage could prevail, and Lily, though still shy and cautious, began reclaiming the simple joys of childhood, coloring her drawings with vibrant strokes, laughing softly at small jokes, and even daring to hum her favorite tunes without fear of judgment or attack. And Emily, watching her daughter's spirit reemerge, felt tears sting her eyes, not of sorrow but of overwhelming pride, for in Lily's bravery, resilience, and determination She had witnessed a force more powerful than Karen's cruelty, a light that refused to be dimmed, no matter how dark the storm had seemed. And the family, united by love and the trials they had endured, began to rebuild not only their sense of safety, but their trust in themselves, knowing that their bond, strengthened by adversity, was unbreakable. And as the community around them began to take notice, neighbors who had once whispered and gossiped now approached with respect, support, and admiration, offering apologies, understanding, and assistance, creating a ripple effect that subtly but profoundly reshaped Willow Creek, proving that courage and integrity could inspire change even in a place steeped in appearances and superficial control. And as Emily tucked Lily into bed that evening, brushing her hair gently and speaking soft words of reassurance, she felt the lingering tension of the past weeks finally start to dissolve, replaced by hope, confidence, and a renewed sense of purpose. And in the quiet darkness of the room, Lily whispered, "Mom, we did it," her small voice steady and filled with wonder, and Emily kissed her forehead, whispering back, "Yes, baby, we did it together," knowing that this shared victory born from fear, courage, and unwavering love had forged a memory that would carry them through future challenges. And as she left the room, the house finally still and peaceful, Emily understood a profound truth. While Karen Whitmore's tyranny had tested them to the edge of despair, it had also revealed their inner strength, resilience, and unity, and that no matter what storms may come, the bond between mother and daughter, fortified by love and bravery, would endure, protect, and illuminate even the darkest corners, leaving both of them forever changed, stronger, and ready to face the world. And as the sun set over Willow Creek, casting long, warm shadows across the carefully tended garden, Emily and Lily shared a quiet moment of reflection and triumph, knowing that justice had been served, courage had prevailed, and the life they had fought so fiercely to protect could now flourish, free from fear, shadowed no longer by cruelty, and forever strengthened by the love and determination that had carried them through the unimaginable.